In this movie, we'll look at how you can simplify sequence diagrams by reusing parts of them and referencing those parts. We'll look at why you would want to reuse parts of sequence diagrams, and then at interaction occurrences, which is what we call these reusable pieces of sequence diagram. We'll see how you reference these interaction occurrences and the use of gates where messages enter and leave them. It's very easy for interaction diagrams to get complex very quickly. You're very unlikely ever to model all the interactions in a system, but you might want to model interactions that are architecturally significant, or to illustrate particular patterns of interaction that would be used across the system, like the model view controller approach to user interface design. The classic approach to managing large complex systems is to break them down into smaller reusable parts, which of course is what we do when we build a system of objects in the first place. It's worth noting that this diagram's already been simplified for the purposes of the course. It's easy for sequence diagrams to get very large and complex. We need a means of breaking a large and complex diagram down by taking out parts of the interaction into separate diagrams. This is what interaction occurrences do. Part of an interaction is moved into a separate diagram. The intention is that those interaction occurrences should then be reusable in multiple other diagrams. So in this diagram, we've replaced the part that deals with testing the device and put it in a separate diagram. When we do this, we typically show the interaction occurrence in a frame. Frames were introduced back at the beginning of the course as one of the common features of UML, and some tools will always export all diagrams in frames. We haven't used them so far as they just take up extra space when we show diagrams, but we'll use them now. Then we can reference that diagram from within any diagram that needs to reuse the occurrence. The notation that we use is a frame with the keyword ref in the top left and the name of the interaction occurrence in the center of the frame. Sometimes when we add an interaction occurrence, there need to be messages going into and out of the diagram. To make this possible, we add gates on the diagram and connect the messages to them. The containing diagram must have the same gates with the same messages going in and out. The diagram here shows a reference to the interaction occurrence device management, with a gate at the side where the getNextEvent message goes out and the reply to that comes in. This diagram shows that interaction in a separate diagram, with the gates at the side where the same two messages go out of and into this diagram. Let's have a look at how this would work in practice. Here we are in Enterprise Architect. We'll create a new view and packages for interactions. I'll add a view to the model by right-clicking and selecting Add and then Add View. I'll call this Interaction View, and it's going to be a dynamic view. Now I'll add a package to the view, and I'll call it Test Device. I can add a package with the buttons at the top of the project browser, so I select the view and click on the New Package button. I'm going to call this Test Device, and I don't want a diagram, so I'm going to create the package only. Then within this package, I'm going to create a new element, an interaction. So I click on the New Element button, and I select UML Interaction in the drop-down list on the right, and then Interaction in the drop-down list on the left. And I'm going to call this Test Device. You'll see that it's created an interaction within the package, and it's created a sequence diagram within that interaction. Now, because I've already created the Add Device diagram, which I'm trying to simplify, I'm going to copy parts of that diagram into my new diagram. So here's the Add Device sequence diagram. I'll select the three lifelines of Controller, Device Manager, and Physical Device. I hold Shift down while I click on them in order to select multiple items. And then I use Edit, Copy, and then I'll go to my new diagram, and I right-click on the diagram and select Paste Elements as New. It asks me which elements I want to paste in, and I make sure that all the checkboxes are checked, including this one for Include Connectors, and click Paste. I'll drag them over to the left of the diagram and then move the controller across to the right. In Add a Device now, I can delete the messages that have been copied into the other diagram. So these four messages here, I can highlight them, selecting them, and just click Delete to delete them from this diagram. Now I can drag the new sequence diagram into this one from the project browser. It asks me how I want to drop the diagram, and I make sure that Interaction Occurrence is selected. I click OK. I'm going to accept the default name, which is Test Device. And now I'll resize this so that it covers the three lifelines that I want it to cover. Now I can close up the diagram slightly. So I've simplified this diagram by taking out 4 messages and replacing them with an interaction occurrence. If I double click on that interaction occurrence, it takes me into the diagram that is contained within it. We don't need a gate in this diagram, but I'll add one just as an example. I can add a gate from the toolbox on the left, and I'll give it the name example. And then I can draw a message, if I like, from that to the controller lifeline. And I could give that message a name and arguments and so on. In the add a device diagram, I could similarly draw a message going into that interaction occurrence from another lifeline. And I would need to ensure that I named the message the same and that it had the same parameters and arguments. I'll delete those for now as we don't actually want them. So we've created a new sequence diagram containing part of the interaction from add a device, and then used that as an interaction occurrence in add a device. We've also seen briefly how to add gates and messages to gates.